Hello, what is up? And this week we are reviewing a short story. In fact, a short story coming from this book right here entitled 100 Great Science Fiction Short Stories. Okay, so there are 100 short stories here, and this is edited by Martin Greenberg and Joseph Ulander. So Martin Greenberg being the more famous editor of science fiction in general. But yeah, this book right here, I'm proud to say that I have a very old copy of that book, but it's in the Philippines. Of course, I didn't bring it. It's in my personal sci-fi library. But we are going to review a particular story in there entitled Present Perfect by this guy named Thomas Monteleone. Okay, so before we delve into that, let's first talk about why it's called a short story. So in fiction, you have your typical short story where you have stories constructed such that their typical lengths are like let's say 20 pages, 10 to 20 pages, or sometimes more than that. Or I'm not really sure about the technical number of words to constitute a short story, but there's another body of work known as a short story, or sometimes it's called flash fiction, whereby sometimes the stories are just as little as a single paragraph, or sometimes there could be just a single page or two pages. You can, that's why they're called flash fiction or short fiction, because you can only read them for 5 minutes or less. Okay, and yeah, the story that we're gonna talk today, the present perfect, this falls under this category. So I'm looking, I keep on looking here at my Kindle because I wasn't sure if the title was present perfect or perfect present, but no, it's present perfect. Okay, this was written by Thomas Monteleone back in 1974. This guy, Thomas Monteleone, he is more famous. He is more known as a horror short story writer. So he does write some science fiction works, but he is known for, in fact, if you've heard of this horror short fiction series, because I also read horror and fantasy, so basically genre fiction. There's this horror series entitled Borderlands. So Thomas Monteleone is one of the editor of that, and it's really a very fascinating series of horror short fiction. But anyway, let's move into this very short or a flash fiction entitled Present Perfect. So this tells a story of William Rutherford. So he is a science fiction editor. So he's like sitting on his couch, scanning some manuscript, and so every time he scans a manuscript, we look at his mindset, and then he is reading the story. So the first story that he finds by some guy named Raymond Muir or something like that. It's entitled Paradise Lost, and yeah, so the main character, William Rutherford, the science fiction editor, he just read the first three paragraphs, and he's like, I know where this short story is going. And then right away he looks at the last page, and then he was right, he guessed it. So in the last page, the scene was, the spaceship that was bringing the entire civilization was all lost, and then there's this guy, he's the only survivor, but then suddenly he saw a woman whose hand was sticking out. She's still alive, and then the guy helped the woman, and then the woman was beautiful, she was a blonde, and then he was like, it looks like we're the only ones alive, and he was smiling, and then he's like, what's your name? My name is Eve. And he was like, he stopped reading. William Rutherford is like, this has been done before, like the last pair of people trying to repopulate civilization. I've seen this before. Next story. So again, he looked at the next manuscript. While doing this, his wife was sitting down looking at him. He's like, another bad story. Yeah, very typical. So he commented on the short story. He said, you think this is enough, but you think this is unique, but our readers have seen a lot of this types of short story before. And so he went to the next short story. So the next short story that he looked at is another sort of last man standing story. So again, you have this. I think it's written by some author named Wild, and so he read it again, and yeah, so it's about the guy who there was like a fallout. It wiped the civilization, and then uh, and then he was the only one alive. So he's like, oh, I must be unique. I must be immune to the radiation. I must have a mutation. And then again, William Rutherford, our main character, the science fiction editor, he looked at the last page, and again he said, yeah, it turns out that he was the character of that story was not the last man standing. There were still it's just a big social experiment. So he was like, I've seen this before, and again he rejected it, and he was like, typically stories with surprise endings are it's very typical in a science fiction, and very rarely are these types of short stories nice. Okay, and he was right. There are a lot of in sci-fi. Usually, a lot of people tend to go to this wow factor, and then or the surprise twist at the end, and then almost like a lot of the times it doesn't work that well. Okay, but anyway, he went to the next short story. It's like, this is so bad. So let's look at the next one. So the next one is this short story about it's called "There's Something Strange About Raymond" or something, written by another guy named John something. So he was reading it, and yeah, the short story is like something like, the village of Unionville wasn't the same when they saw a UFO or something, and then it turns out that the main character of that story that he was reading, which was named Raymond, it was told from the point of view of some other guy who was like colleagues with Raymond. He's like, I always knew there's something wrong with Raymond, but then when the UFO came, and then William Rutherford is like, I've seen this before. This is another of those alien among us trope story. Like, I thought he was a human, but he's an alien. Blah blah blah. So he said, I've seen this before. Like, isn't there anything unique? Isn't there anything something new or nice? And so again, this is a short story. So when he went to the fourth one, he was his wife commented something about deja vu. The wife is like, maybe it's because there's like an overarching theme in sci-fi, but or sometimes maybe it's just deja vu. Like you just feel like you've seen it before. And then he was like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. And then he picked the next manuscript, the next envelope, and then when he looked at it, it was entitled present perfect, and the one who submitted it was Thomas Monteleone himself. And then again, the structure of the story is when William Rutherford read it, the first paragraph of the story he was reading is exactly the first paragraph of what we the readers are reading. Okay, so it's a nice gimmick, in the span of the short or the flash fiction, in the span of the length that Monteleone was allowed to write. He was able to insert that gimmick of um, being so he was reading a short story, but then suddenly there's this sci-fi author who was writing about that very night that he was doing this review of the different short stories. That's why it's called present perfect. So it would have been nice. The thing is, the wow factor is lost on my part, because I've read another short story before. In fact, this is a required reading back in college when I was taking literature. It's by Julio Cortazar, known as the continuity of parks. Okay, and it would have been, present perfect would have been awesome if not for the fact that Continuity of Parks was written 10 years before it. Continuity of Parks is written in 1964. And if you haven't read Continuity of the Parks, it kind of has like the same idea. So you have the main character. It's we're told about a main character. He was tired at work, and then he sat on this like I think it was green velvet chair. He read a novel, and then the novel he was reading was about two lovers, a man and a wife, and then they plan on killing the husband of the wife so that they can elope together. And so the man went to the house of the wife, and then he went in order to kill the husband. So he went into the room and then saw this guy who was in a green velvet reading a novel. Okay, so it's not exactly the same, but the kind of idea is kind of like that, like looping a story, whether it's within the story itself or within the real world. It kind of looks like that. And also, I've already seen this another short story before that deals with. It's entitled "Who's Fibbing." So let me search it right here, very quick. Who wrote that? Because it's escaping my mind right now. But yeah, there's this science fiction short story again told in the guise of like again manuscript editors, but in this case the author is like writing to the editor explaining that his work is not plagiarized. So it's kind of it kind of looks like that. So I think it's the title Who's Fibbing. I can't find it right now, but yeah, maybe I'm gonna review it at some other time. But yeah, I couldn't. I think maybe the title's not Who's Fibbing, but anyway, yeah. So yeah. So I've seen a sci-fi short story before that, like who's the one I was talking about, Who's Fibbing, whose author I can't recall right now, but who tells a story from the point of view of science fiction editors. And again, I've seen a short story which is like I mentioned, the continuity of the parks that loops, the author, or that goes outside of the story. In fact, I attempted writing a before when I was in college. I tried. I also did some short story. I wrote some short stories. I had a short story that kind of looks like that. It's like there's this like thinking back, it sounds very cliche, but yeah, the idea of my story is, I think it's entitled The Curse of July. Like there's this short story that is circulating, and then there's a curse, and then the guy who read it, who reads it, his life will be messed up or something like that. And then in the end, it will turn out that the very short story that they are reading is exactly the same short story that you are reading right now, The Curse of July. And thinking back, yeah, I think it's a very gimmicky, but it's kind of cool. But thinking back right now, if you're really good, or if you've seen a lot of tropes before, you can smell from afar that that's where my story was leading you, right? Like in the end, you're actually reading that exact short story that curse everyone. But yeah, it's kind of like this, the present perfect. Yeah, but anyway, so score. So I think I kind of will. I'm gonna give this short story a 6 out of 10. So again, if you can push that there's a sci-fi there, like the looping of like someone can tell that someone's gonna do something. But yeah, it's the for me the wow factor was gone. So if I haven't read science fiction short stories before that dealt with science fiction editors, or if I haven't read Continuity of Parks, because I remember the first time I read Continuity of Parks, I was like mind blown. So I think if I haven't read that, I think it would have been the score for this particular story right here would have been higher. Okay, and yeah, speaking of which, Continuity of Parks, by the way, is also a flash fiction. It's really very short. Okay, so if you haven't read that, go ahead and read it. And if you want to check this out, Present Perfect, you can compare it yourself. But yeah, anyway, that's it for this week's round of science fiction review, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.